Hey there, and welcome to the Dynamics Hot Dish Podcast, serving up stories and knowledge on Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. This is what's hot in Dynamics. You're now joining Merlin Schweiger, Liz McGlennon, and Ashley Steiner.
So, you guys, I'm making Christmas presents, and I'm sewing a new thing that I've never done before, and I'm making those microwavable, like, neck warmer things. So I'm to the point where I'm putting the flaxseed into them, and I'm doing it in my living room, and the flax seeds ended up all over my living room last night because I'm pouring them into this, like, little tiny hole, and they just go everywhere. It's a mess.
They are awful.
Like a nightmare.
And they stick to things when they get wet, like they just won't let go.
And
luckily,
why
nothing's
flaxseed?
wet right now.
And why flaxseed? Like over something else?
They were cheaper than rice.
Oh, okay. I don't even know what flaxseed is, so that's crazy. Like, never even heard of it.
Yeah, I've never used them for anything but, like, neck warmers.
It's
We
interesting.
put them on top of muffins. Sorry, go ahead, Ashley.
Oh, I was gonna say, because that makes me think I have a pellet stove in my basement. I don't know if that's like common outside of the Midwest, but it's basically to warm up. Merlin, I don't know, Liz, Merlin, I don't know if you guys know what that is, but you put these hardwood pellets in it to warm up your house. I have electric heating in my house, which can get kind of expensive. It's an older home, and so the pellet stove, it basically burns the hardwood pellet. It's the most energy efficient way to heat a home. And so you buy these pellet stoves. It's really common in Wisconsin to have these, and it like heats up because hot air rises. So you have them in your basement, and then it kind of heats up the whole house. And they make these pellets out of the dust from sawmills. So it's completely like energy efficient, and it's awesome. So I went to fill the pellet stove two days ago in the morning. And so I opened the bag and I went to fill it in, and the bag completely ripped and the pellets went everywhere all over my basement. And so I had spent the morning, instead of working, I had to like clean up all the pellets. And,
How big are the pellets?
I'd say they're probably like a good 1/4 inch,
Okay.
maybe a little bit bigger.
Yeah, that's a hassle.
Yeah, it was horrible.
Pretty small.
Yeah, so like vacuumed them all up, and then they got like into like the crevices of the pellet stove, so I had to like turn it off, and then like they started to smolder, and my house smelled like it was on fire. Yeah, so welcome to winter in Wisconsin, guys. So fun.
I've never heard of
That's
that
awesome.
before.
I've heard of pellet grills, but I've never heard of stove.
Yeah, it's awesome. I actually really love it. It's cut down on heat, like my heat bill a lot here, electric bill.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So I guess we could get into today's topic. Not everyone has to deal with the Wisconsin or Minnesotan winter like we do, right? So today we're going to talk about how to get ready or be prepared for a project inside of your Dynamics or Power Platform environments. So what do you guys have to say kind of about that? What kind of projects have you guys worked on, or what advice do you have for people? Who wants to start?
I'll start. Also, just as an aside, I would like to compliment you as a transplant on your appropriate Wisconsin pronunciation of Wisconsin. Very open.
I did grow up here, so.
All right. So my thoughts on getting ready for a project, and I will admit this is from the outside perspective because I've never been an internal admin, but the things that I think are important for people to think about when they're getting ready for their own project is to try to focus on the end result instead of on the process to get there. I've been calling this focusing on the outcomes. Think about the outcomes and not just the process. But like a good example of that is if you are trying to figure out, you're gathering requirements, right? You're in your requirements gathering session with your partner, and they say, well, we need it to do this, and then this, and then this. And the consultant says, why do you need it to do that? If anyone ever answers, because that's just the way that it's always been done, that should be a giant red flag right there. To be like, okay, but why? Why is it being done that way? Probably it's being done that way so that, somebody else in a different department gets the data that they need. But maybe they could get that data in a different way, or maybe there would be a more efficient way to do it, or maybe it was built as a workaround 15 years ago because the software couldn't do what they needed it to do. And so I feel like focusing on that end goal, especially when you're doing requirements gathering, I think is key.
So when it comes to requirements gathering, I like to encourage people to prioritize too. So I've seen a lot of projects where they want everything. Like you want to do everything and solve every problem the first go around. And then the project takes a year or 2 or 3 or whatever to go live, which is awful because you're not delivering any results to the business if you wait that long. Also, the technology changes so fast that what you built a year ago or 2 years ago might not be using the latest and greatest or as relevant, and your business changes as well. So take a phased approach, prioritize your items, and know that you can continually add to it and enhance it over time.
Yeah, I think going incrementally, I think that really talks about prioritizing things. So being incremental, a term that I've always used is what is the MVP? So, what do you have to go live, at least just initially, in order to get your users up and running, and then making sure that what you're trying to achieve actually works. So what is your minimum viable product in order to make sure that what you're trying to do actually works? So I've, always kind of worked in that kind of environment, and that seems to work for a lot of organizations. I like to work in that kind of environment because you're getting something at least up and running that can work for a lot of people. And then you have something, and then you can continue to grow and build on that over time. So I like to work small, work incremental, and then you can always build on top of it. And then you have something at least that's live rather than waiting, like Liz said, like 2-3 years before you even have something that people can use.
It's true. I think I actually made these notes in my notes for a different podcast episode, but I think focusing on, like you're saying, that incremental, like an agile approach, like whatever, so that you're releasing things faster. Like imagine if you had done all of your requirements gathering for your, like 8-month-long project in December of 2019, or even January of 2020, right? And you're like, okay, these are our requirements. This is what we need for our business to be successful for the rest of 2020. Let's build it. And then you turn those requirements over to your developer in mid-February. And then in March, everything turns upside down, right? And now what? Now your requirements, probably some of them are still applicable, but like just think of how many things change there. If you're working in an incremental fashion, then it's easy to correct and say, actually, instead of doing that, we need to do this, or we need to focus on, shipping and logistics more so than in-store stock. But if you're doing it in a big waterfall, like Big Bang approach, how are you gonna correct that?
Yeah, and I think that inviting the right people into those conversations is key as well. So making sure that you have the right people to help you gather those requirements. So making sure that you're not doing things in like a bubble or in a vacuum, that you're considering all the right parties.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think you need both the business and IT involved when you do a new implementation or a new enhancement. And to plan for that ahead of time, like don't invite them to the meeting the day of or the day before, like inform them, prep them, set expectations on how much time you expect from them. Because I see that as an issue a lot where people get added last minute and they don't know what's going on, or they don't know they weren't on the kickoff, or they don't know the goal or the vision of the project, or they don't have the time to participate. So just planning for that ahead of time before you actually start the meetings.
And I think that'll allow for you to change rapidly. Like in the example that Merlin gave, I mean, who could have predicted that 2020 was going to end up the way that it did? So if you have people prepped and ready for the project, and you give them time to learn what it's about and have them prepared, it'll make you, more easily adaptable as things out of your control occur.
Yep. I was also going to add to that, sort of thinking about requirements gathering and thinking about the outcomes. One of the things that I see a lot of customers will try to do is sort of dictate the solution that they're looking for, right? So they say they've presumably done their research and they, want to track opportunity data and they want to keep track of their sales process. So they say, okay, we need to track opportunities and we need this and we need this and we need this. And based on all the reading that I've done on Dynamics, like these are the features that I need to use. and then the consultant says, okay, they write it all down, and then they turn all those things on. I would caution basically anyone, consultant or internal user, to do that early on when you're gathering the requirements. Like, focus on what the requirement is for the business and not necessarily on the functionality you think it's going to use, and let the consultant, who presumably knows the software better than you do, come up with how best to map that process into the software instead of sort of dictating the features that you want to use.
Or your internal team. I mean, there's definitely people that do projects without a partner or consultant too. So if you have an internal BA gathering requirements, let them do that. Yeah, let them the solution, the system, and not the business stakeholder.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the things that can really go wrong in a project is when you start to solution on the spot. And I think that we talk about that a lot, the three of us, is like when you're gathering requirements, I'm guilty of this. You start to hear somebody complain about a problem or say, oh man, this is the problem that we're trying to solve. And you're like, oh, I know that this thing right here can fix that, immediately. But there's so many things available now in just the whole Dynamics world and Power Platform that, you might not be aware of, or somebody else that you talk to that's on your team, or, you could go to a consultant or a partner or somebody that might have just another solution. And then it's a better solution or just fixes it more, quickly. So just don't, I would say just try to be open-minded about what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
So what else, what other things should be considered to be prepared? One of the things that I always like to be prepared is having a shared workspace for everybody. I'm not sure if that's something that you guys have always considered, but I think that one of the things that I learned really quickly in my career was making sure that everybody does not have their own place for notes or, and it seems so small, now I'm 10 years into this or whatever, having a one share drive or a Teams, they make it a little bit easier now, or a SharePoint site or things like that. But make sure that everybody has access to the, one place in order to find, if you're doing Excel documents or things like that. But having this shared workspace to gather, all the notes, documentation, all of your, your requirement documentation that you're doing or your notes, things like that. So I don't know if you guys have similar information.
I think that's a good idea.
It is. I've definitely seen it as a problem where that's not identified or there's multiple places. Things can get really discombobulated really fast.
Yeah, especially when you start emailing documents back and forth, and then you've got Ashley's updating one and Liz is updating another copy, and then I'm over here updating my copy, and then who knows which one's right anymore.
Yeah, I think it's general best practice. Just don't email your documents. Put them in Teams, put them in SharePoint, a shared drive somewhere.
I agree. I hate getting documents in my email. Guys, don't ever send me a document in email. I don't want it.
I hate it too, actually, especially with the invention of Teams. I feel like Microsoft has made it so easy. I mean, even if you're not using a Microsoft tool, it's so easy to use some sort of shared drive, like Google Share or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
One of the things that occurred to me while I was thinking about this that I feel like I often forget because I've been doing this for long enough is if you're an end user joining a project team to do a Dynamics or a Power Platform implementation, Microsoft has a lot of terms that they like to use and a lot of acronyms that they like to throw around, and all of us in the space just sort of adapt to it and start throwing around all the terms and acronyms. Like earlier you were talking about the MVP, and I thought, oh yes, of course, the MVP. And I thought, but wait, if I'd never heard that before, I might wonder, what does she mean by MVP? And I feel like there's a lot of those terms, and I think it would be very important to make sure that, if you were a new person getting into a project, that you have someone bring you up to speed on all of the terms and acronyms and everything else that apply.
Absolutely.
So that you're speaking the same language, right?
Yeah.
And in my defense, I did define MVP. I said it was a minimum viable
You
product.
did.
So in my defense, I did define
I'm glad
it,
you
but
did. I was going to ask you to.
Yeah, so but I think that is important because even your internal teams could have definitions that might be different than what Microsoft is using. So I think that is important.
Yeah,
So.
and that's actually a perfect example is a situation where internally to your business, you use a term that Microsoft is using also, but you each mean slightly different things by using it, right? Like, oh, a lead. Oh, we need to track leads. Great. The consultant thinks there's leads out of the box in CRM, but for a lead for your business, maybe it's something totally different and it doesn't actually map to the lead entity at all. And so now you've got like this total disconnect where you think you're on the same page because you're using the same word, but it actually does not mean the same thing at all.
And that's actually true because a lead in LinkedIn is a contact. So
true.
Like that is a true real life example. And we'll get into LinkedIn, I'm sure, on future podcasts, but I think that is just one real life example of two Microsoft products that don't sync up with the same terminology, just right there. So what else do people need to consider when they're working on projects, or how do you work internally with a team and with a partner? Like what kind of advice would you have for people?
So something I see that gets cut or missed a lot or just pushed off to the end is user adoption, change management, and training. So people focus on the technology and building a solution that works technically, but they kind of forget like the people side of it. And you can have a perfect solution technically and it could work, but if people don't use it or don't want to use it or don't understand how to use it, it will fail. And I think that's harder because it's not this black and white, it works, it doesn't work, we tested it. You're dealing with people's resistance to change for a variety of reasons. And you don't know, what the history is with that team, with that company, like the internal culture. You have to adapt to all of that and plan and think about all of that. And if you're a consultant or a third party helping with it, you need to work with the customer. You can't just do that for them. It has to be a partnership and there has to be that trust there. So my advice is just don't underestimate that aspect because I think that it's common to cut that out of the budget or to skim past that. And it causes a lot of problems down the road if you do that.
What kind of advice? Oh, so go ahead, Merlin. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say as sort of an additive related thought to that, having been in the partner space for a while, I feel like most of us are sort of guilty of this, of thinking of an implementation project as sort of like a one and done. And I don't feel like we do a good enough job of conveying to the customer that if you're not making changes to your system on a fairly regular basis, it's going to stagnate. And that means it's not keeping up with your business. And that means eventually 3, 4, 5 years down the road, or in some cases, 15 years down the road, you're going to realize, oh, the software doesn't do anything that I needed to do. And you're going to think you have to throw it all away and start over again, right? Because you didn't sort of maintain it, because that expectation wasn't set that after this is in, you gotta keep it up to date. And I feel like that's frequently forgotten.
Yeah, there is no done with it. It's not ever done. It's you should always like allocate resources to maintain and enhance it.
Right.
Yeah.
There should always be a team.
Yeah.
There should always be an Ashley keeping it up to date.
Yeah. So I think that's a good call out here, right? Is that I've typically always been on the end user side. And when I was kind of thinking about this topic and how to be prepared for a project, I selfishly thought of myself, like, how do I prepare myself to get ready for a project? But I think that you also have to think about your end users. How do you get your end users ready for a project, right? Because this is going to probably impact them more than it would impact me. Yeah, sure. So my job is going to be impacted. I have to get ready to implement it, work on it. But, we have to get our end users ready to actually handle the changes that are going to come out of whatever is going to change with the end of this project. I mean, what advice? I mean, how do we get them ready for that kind of change? And I think, Liz, you touched on that with change management, but I mean, is it training? Is it just a conversation?
All the above. Yeah, I mean, how many times do you have to say something before someone remembers it? 7, I think. So you over communicate, over train, like you can't just tell them once, you can't just send an email, you can't just do one training, like you have to repeat it over and over and over again. And you can't just think that you can teach them, show them once, tell them once, and they'll be on board or get it.
But I think that's a really big call out here is that when you do, and I guess I don't know if you consider projects to Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform at your own companies, right? Like if that's your own company, that depends, right? But they're not just tech projects. They're not just, CRM projects, Dynamics projects, whatever. They're really end user projects because that's who they're impacting. So you have to consider how this is going to impact them in the end.
Yeah. I think executive sponsorship is huge for that too. If the managers, if the leaders aren't on board or clearly communicating and reinforcing the vision and the why behind the project, it's really hard to get some end users to adopt it.
Yeah, it's true. I did a project once that was a basic sales implementation, put in opportunity management and trained all the salespeople on how to do their opportunity stuff. They were all remote online trainings. This was, like 8 years ago. So it was still a remote online training then, which means that absolutely nobody was paying any attention at all. And 6 months down the road, the data in CRM was garbage and people wanted to know why it was garbage. Well, it turned out the VP of sales never logged into the system. He still expected people to send him data on a spreadsheet because that's what they've been doing before. And so if I'm a salesperson, am I going to put all my data into CRM and then also put it in a spreadsheet that I know my boss looks at the spreadsheet, but not CRM? I'm never going to use CRM.
Of course not.
Just never going to use. That's the way it was.
Classic
and I think
story.
that fully goes back to no kidding. And that goes back to your outcomes, right? Is setting that stage from the beginning of, was the outcome of this that spreadsheet, and how do you get that spreadsheet of reporting into Dynamics? I struggle, I've struggled with that as an admin, right? Is, having leadership log into the system. So.
Right. Well, and that outcome.
Everyday story.
I feel like that outcome is often phrased as, well, we need to be able to see a consolidated view of this data. But there is no we defined. Like the CEO thinks that he wants to see that consolidated data, but he doesn't care where it's coming from. He just wants to see it. So as long as the VP of sales can produce it, spreadsheet, CRM, whatever, right? The CEO might think, though, it needs to be in a CRM. And I feel like that then ties into your user adoption stuff too, is if your desired outcome is, I need to see all of this data in one spot so that I can keep an eye on my salespeople, what's in it for the salesperson? Like, why are they going to put their data in there? Oh, you're signing me up to voluntarily give my data to Big Brother? Why would I do that? Right? So if you want people to use it, I feel like you also have to think about, well, what's going to make it useful for the salesperson such that the side effect is that all the data is in the system and we can see it all, instead of that's the driver and the side effect is the sales guy has to do a bunch of data entry. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying it has to be done.
It's like the crux of CRM. It's the hardest part is making that point.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say my last thing about how to be prepared for a project, I don't know if you guys have any additional things to add. I'm sure you do, but it's just giving responsibilities to people. Liz, you touched on this for bringing in sales leadership or executives, getting executive involvement, but I think just responsibilities across the board. And I think that this is where you can involve the sales team so as well. So Marilyn, you brought up, getting sales involved and having them, how to get them to get involved in the project, sales leadership, and then also executives. So assigning that role. So what executive is going to have that power? Which one is going to have that? Okay, I, am bringing this project in. I, endorse this project. And then what sales leader is going to say, yes, these are the reports I need out of it. This is how I encourage my sales team to use it. And then actually get salespeople involved in the project. If it is a sales project, it could be any sort of project, right? It could be marketing, it could be Power Platform, but give people responsibilities that are a part of the team. And then, make sure that they're following up on their responsibilities. I've also heard that there are tools coming out to see if people are engaged in meetings virtually. This is totally something we could take into a different podcast. But I've heard Microsoft is coming out with a tool that you could see if people are engaged in meetings, and then people are not engaged in their meetings, maybe they're not fulfilling their responsibilities. So maybe that's something we should dive into on a future podcast. And then maybe they're not invited to this project anymore.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a really good point. And I think you're driving home that there's one leader that's responsible. I've definitely seen it where there's 2 or 3 leaders that have to have a unanimous decision on everything. And that really delays the project. I think, Ashley, you've had that experience too.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And same all roles on the project team, like just having people know what their responsibilities are helps, instead of people being confused about, am I the PM? Am I the BA? Do I have decision-making authority? Like just clearing that up really helps.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this more lately in terms of like agile development team structures. And I know that agile's pretty hot in the marketplace today, but I feel like lots of people don't really know like what it's good for. But like one of the roles in an agile team is the product owner. And the product owner is in charge of making the design decisions on the product. In this case, your implementation of sales or marketing or whatever. And there's only one product owner, and the product owner is the person who gets to make the decisions.
So you don't think it should be a committee?
I don't think it should be a committee. No. Well, because it's exactly that, right? Like, and the whole idea behind agile is you streamline things so that you can speed up your development cycle. Well, if you have a committee of 3 or 5 people or whatever making every single design decision, that's going to slow you down so much, and you're going to fall way behind. You're going to spend way more money with people just sitting around waiting for work to do. So yes, one decision maker. If they can't decide on somebody that they trust, then I don't know.
And Agile is one of those things that is very hot right now, and Scrum is like the cool thing to do, right? But it only works if you all are on the same page and you know what you're doing. Like I've seen it where like a project team will say, we're going to run Scrum, but no one on the team's ever done Agile. No one's had Scrum training. The Scrum Master hasn't had Scrum training. So they're kind of just PMing it like a regular project. So Agile is not just no plan. Like it's not an excuse not to have a structure. You actually should pick a structure, a framework, and follow it. Otherwise it won't work. Otherwise it's just chaos.
True. It's a good topic for another podcast.
It is. But you brought it up, so I had to say it.
Yeah, I was like, I have so much more to say on that topic, but I'll hold myself back a little bit.
Definitely another podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So come back for that one, guys. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up this topic. Definitely come back and tune in for our next topic. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Dynamics Hot Dish podcast. For additional content and previous episodes, check out our website at dynamicshotdish.com, follow us on Twitter at dynamicshotdish, and subscribe to our podcast for notifications. Thanks. See you next time.